Hello there. What is going on, everybody? Today, we're going to be talking about interior battles for Star Wars Legion. If you've been following my channel for a little while, you may have seen a little bit of the terrain reviews I've done for like LV-427, for example, or some battle reports using interior terrain tiles, or maybe like the Imperial Bunker, and you're looking at doing something like that. I'm going to talk about that today because I think there's some lessons learned from some of my games and from some discussions with people about running interior battle reports and just interior games, and why I don't think that you should just run those as normal games. So yeah, let's. I kind of want to talk about that a little bit today. So you may have also actually seen this photo going around. I think this is from Midwest Token 3D. They printed out a whole 6x3 table of all of this interior terrain. That's really, really cool. And this is kind of what we, Sean and I did a battle on, I think 2 or 3 months ago. It's kind of hard to tell right now because time is virtually standing still, right? So it's hard for me to remember exactly when it was, but there's definitely some things I think that you need to address if you're going to play a game like this. So first thing is first, I think you want to talk with your opponent and definitely pre-plan the game ahead of time. Say, hey, are we playing next weekend or whatever, and deliberately say, okay, are we gonna do a normal game or are we gonna do an interior game? Because it really helps and it's really fair. You don't want somebody to just show up with like 2 tanks and they have nowhere to move them and they can't even place them on the board, because that's not fun for anybody. So and that's really a big thing about interior battles is generally vehicles are probably going to be a no-go, right? You're probably not going to want to run vehicles for an interior battle. You may also want to run a smaller type of battle. You may want to run an interior skirmish. It's easier to get away with not running any vehicles if you're maybe just running a smaller subset, because some people for larger, I mean, granted, you can, if you got enough stuff, you can certainly run larger builds without vehicles also, but at the same time, when you're restricting your build, it might make more sense to play in a format that's already restricted. So that's one option that you can do. Plus, movement through corridors and through having to open doors and things like that can kind of slow the game down a little bit. And if you're that far away from each other, you might not even get any shots fired, depending on how you do your rules. So I think it's definitely important to kind of establish the ground rules ahead of time and say all right, what kind of builds are we going to be doing? Are we going to be inside or outside, or maybe a combination of both? And even if you're doing a combination of both, it's important to kind of lay down the ground rules for what is going to be the rules for the inside stuff. One big thing I think is important to also talk about is how is ranges and being able to move over obstacles affected when you're indoors. For example, the clearest cut example I can think of, which was one of the first things we addressed when we, on this channel when we were doing interior stuff, is we said, all right, no jumping over terrain if it's a wall. In other words, a wall inside of something like this is going to be treated as going up to the ceiling, and then you are completely encased, so you can't jump up or jump around. This also means you may want to potentially restrict certain types of command cards or condition cards or things like that. Like rapid reinforcements is something that you might kind of want to determine if you're going to do that ahead of time or not. Because I think the idea of rapid reinforcements is that they're airdropped into place. Now, you can certainly say, okay, well, they crawled through the ducts, or maybe they used some explosives and blew a hole through the ceiling and kind of jumped in that way. So that maybe that's something that you think is okay. But it's important to talk about your opponent, because what you don't want is for a trigger or a game condition to arrive in the middle of your game, and all of a sudden you get into an argument. It's like, well, that shouldn't work. How come you're able to do that? And oh, well, we didn't talk about this beforehand. And then all of a sudden somebody has an advantage, and now it's harder to have a discussion. Now, granted, if you're doing something like this, probably going to be a casual type of game. This is not something you want to play a very competitive game. I would not practice for a major tournament on something like this, unless of course it was some type of specific tournament that was deliberately built for interior battles. But tournaments generally aren't run that way. So this is more of like a scenario or a one-off or just a for fun battle, I think, to do interior stuff, because it's going to change so many of the rules. And climbing over walls, clambering over walls, things like that. You really have to lay down the groundwork of what's going to be a wall that goes all the way up to the ceiling versus what types of terrain are not, that you can pass through or jump over. And that's an important thing. Also, the restrictions on not being able to take, very big vehicles that they simply can't fit through doorways and stuff like that is also another big limiter. Another thing I think that's important to talk about is certain range-based abilities and, how they're going to work on an indoor setting. For example, can commanders still give out orders to people that are within range if they're in a whole different room? That may be something you want to talk about and agree upon. Personally, I would recommend that they probably can. I don't see an issue with commanders being able to issue orders because the idea is that you have a comm or a radio. But at the same time, you may decide, then this is up to you, on whether or not that same distance is also going to affect panic if you're in different rooms. And especially if you're in closed off rooms, because thematically you could say, how is Luke Skywalker actually going to inspire this guy when he's stuck in the trash compactor and I'm on level 2 of the Death Star? I'm nowhere near this other person. How is he going to, when you're outdoors and stuff, like there's a different sense of things, but when you're in a whole different room completely isolated from somebody, you can't see them or even hear them, then certain things become a little bit more difficult. And so I can understand that maybe, that's something that you might decide you want to say, okay, you can still issue orders, but you can't do this. So certain ranged-based things, you'll kind of want to look at all of those and decide beforehand. I would also suggest before picking table sides or anything like that, you look at the lists and just think about any questions that might arise. Hey, what is expert climber going to mean in this? Is this something that they can, okay, yes, or they can't climb through the wall? Okay, got it. Things like that. Force powers is another one. I think in the last game that I played with, we decided that you could use force powers through walls, through different rooms, and etc. Because they're, in an exterior, in a normal game, a piece of terrain does not stop you from, being able to force push somebody or something like that. And so that led for some really strange situations, because it certainly seems like a wall that's cutting the map in half, like that's not even just it goes beyond being a piece of terrain at that point, and it's like it's part of the map, that you could force push somebody through, or using somebody like Operative Vader's 1-pip card, where you can pick somebody up and place them down at range 1. Well, I just pulled somebody into a whole nother room, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, and that was something that we had kind of talked about beforehand, and when it actually happened in our game, initially we had said it was all right, that something like that might work, and then when it was time to actually do it, it really gave me a huge advantage, and it was really a feels bad scenario, for the other player, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'm like, how did you just pull somebody through a wall? And I kind of painted it up as like he ripped somebody through the wall, and the cabling, ripped a hole in the wall and pulled somebody through, or something like that. But in reality, I don't think it's healthy for the game if you want to have a very fun interior battle, to have Jedi and Force using characters that are able to interact with stuff that's in a room that they're not even in. It's almost like you're on a different map at that point, and it's a little imbalancing. So I would suggest restricting Force abilities to either at least being in the same room or having line of sight, and discuss that with your opponent beforehand, because I think if you can see somebody, like, you'd have a hard time force pushing somebody that you couldn't see. And while there is some precedent for it, I think in this context it makes more sense if you can see them. So that's something I think it's worth talking about. There's certain units also that I want to talk about for interior battles that I think are going to be really good. And I think some factions probably have more of an advantage than others. So we'll start off with Rebels. I mean, they have, Wookiees, right? Everybody likes Wookiees, right? And especially now that they're not quite so tall, maybe they'll get a little more play. But this is one of those situations where I think they're really, really going to shine. Because of charge, because of their close range pistol, only 1 to 2 for that, I think it's a great option to be able to bring Wookiees into the game and just get them doing really, really well. Fleet Troopers are another one. I think an obvious one. I think Fleet Troopers are maybe the most obvious because you see them specifically in hallways. Their first appearance is in an interior battle report, right? In an interior battle in the beginning of episode 4. I think Fleet Troopers are kind of an obvious one. Somebody else that I think is also potentially really good is Han Solo. Somebody who really kind of suffers for that range 2, but it's so good, right? Well, in a shootout, like he was doing on the Death Star, for example, he's able to do a lot better that way because that range isn't so restrictive. He's going to have a much easier time, moving up and getting into that position. So, and being able to, see people, you're a lot closer together. Again, I think most characters that have, range 1 to 2 attacks are going to really be able to do a lot better here because you're not going to be getting shot generally from quite so far away. So that is a very cool thing. Imperial Royal Guards, another one that, a lot of times they're used for their Guardian ability, but here's an opportunity for them to be able to function as also very good ranged options, especially if you want to give them, fragmentation grenades. Oh, so good. So good on these guys. But no, I really like that as an option with them. But, for an interior battle report or, an interior battle sounds really, really cool. Scout Troopers too, not running them just as the sniper strike team, right? But Scout Troopers, specifically the Empire's version of, the first Special Forces unit they have that really good range 1 to 2 attack. Now, they don't have that offensive surge, but, they have the grenade slot, so you can easily give that to them. Plus, with aggressive tactics, they can get that offensive surge. It's a really cool option. I think that's a really fun one for the Empire. And the original factions aren't the only ones that are going to have it too. The B2 super battle droids kind of fall into that same category. Whereas if they are able to not be sniped at range 4 while they're slowly walking up to you, they can, once they get into range, that's going to be awesome. Could you imagine running 6 of these in an interior battle? It might be something beautiful or terrible depending on what side of the table you're on. No, I don't think that we have a whole lot for the clones right now, but I do want to point out that at least in the case of the initial phase 1 clone trooper, being the cheaper option, they still can do really, really well with standby. And this is a time where token sharing can really flourish because of their standby default range of being 1 to 2. It's not usually something you run on phase 1 clones as much because of the fact that, they don't have, Overwatch. They can't extend to range 3. So their standby is only stuck at range 2, and usually people don't come into range 2, but around corners with other people being able to rock that standby and sharing all that tokens, it can really make a very efficient use of the phase 1 clones without needing to use the phase 2 clones. So I think that's a pretty cool. I mean, granted, phase 2s are also good already, but I think the phase 1's lack of the phase 2 clones extra support, like the training upgrade and things like that, also the cheaper cost of the phase 1s allow them to potentially shine a little bit more on an interior battle report because you're going to get a little bit more for your buck. All right, well, that's some of my thoughts. I would love to hear what you guys think. Do you think maybe certain other commanders are going to do really, really well in interior battle reports, like maybe Palpatine? I mean, he's already pretty good as is, but I mean, imagine Palpatine in an interior game. What about Vader? Or what faction do you think makes out the best if you're running indoor battles? I feel like the Rebels and the Empire probably have an advantage on either case because they have years more content than the other factions, and of course I think that makes a little bit of sense, but I would love to hear what you guys think. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.